I want to start by telling you the last thing I saw before they took me away in handcuffs, because it matters later. It was my daughter's face pressed against the fence at the edge of our property, watching two deputies walk her father to a squad car over a fraud charge I didn't commit. I was 38 years old, a hydrology engineer who had spent 14 years designing water systems for 3 different counties, and I was about to lose 18 months of my life to a prison sentence built on paperwork I never signed. But this story isn't really about the conviction. It's about what happened to the $9 million reservoir on my family's land while I was gone, and about the woman who thought a locked cell meant a locked mouth. My name doesn't matter as much as the land does. My grandfather bought 400 acres in the hill country back when land like that was cheap and unwanted, and buried somewhere in the deed, in language nobody in my family bothered to read for 60 years, was a private water reservoir fed by an underground spring that the county had classified, decades earlier, as a protected water source. It wasn't just a pretty lake. It was legally mine, registered, permitted, and worth more than the house sitting next to it. When the Brook Hello Estates development went up next door, the HOA board took one look at that reservoir and decided the rules didn't apply to them. The woman running that board was named Deborah Voss, and she had a talent for making other people's property feel like her personal inventory. Before I ever went to prison, she'd already tried twice to get an easement across my land for the development's landscaping crew, and twice I'd told her no, because that reservoir fed the drinking water for 6 households downstream, including my own. She didn't like being told no. People who are used to power rarely do. Here's where the story takes its first turn, because the fraud charge that sent me away wasn't random. 2 months before my arrest, I discovered that a permit application had been filed with the county under my name, using a forged signature, requesting reclassification of my reservoir from protected water source to unrestricted private property. I didn't understand yet why someone would fake that paperwork, but I reported the forgery to the county clerk's office. 9 weeks later, I was arrested on an unrelated financial fraud charge tied to a business account I hadn't touched in years, built on records that had clearly been altered. I didn't put it together at the time. I was too busy trying to keep my family from falling apart. While I sat in a cell learning how to survive on institutional patience, Deborah Voss got exactly what she'd been chasing. With the reservoir owner in prison and no cosigner able to contest paperwork, the reclassification went through on a technicality, an assumed default, since I supposedly hadn't responded to a certified letter that had in fact never reached me. Within 4 months, Brook Hello Estates had drainage pipes running straight into my reservoir, pulling water to fill 3 new community pools, an ornamental lake for the clubhouse, and irrigation for 200 new lawns. She didn't just steal water. She drained a federally monitored aquifer-fed reservoir at a rate that dropped the water table for 6 miles in every direction. My wife tried to fight it from the outside, but she was raising 2 kids alone and fending off HOA lawyers who insisted everything was legal. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had a friend from my engineering days named Priya who worked for the state's Water Resources Board. I wrote her letters from prison, careful and quiet, asking her to just watch the flow data on that reservoir, nothing more. I didn't ask for help, I asked for evidence. Because 18 months is a long time to think, and somewhere around month 6, sitting in a library that smelled like old paper and bleach, I finally understood what Deborah Voss hadn't counted on. A protected water source doesn't just belong to the landowner. Under state law, draining one below a certain threshold without authorization isn't a civil violation, it's a criminal one, with penalties calculated per gallon per day, tied to environmental damage statutes usually reserved for corporations, not homeowners associations. If you're the kind of person who likes stories where patience beats panic, you're going to want to stick around for what comes next. And if that's you, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because this next part is the reason people are still talking about this case. By the time my name was cleared, because it was cleared 11 months in, when a forensic accountant hired by my public defender matched the altered account records to a signature style traced back to Deborah Voss's own son, a bored 24-year-old with a minor hacking conviction, who'd done it as what he later called a favor for his mother, I walked out of that facility not angry, but calm in a way that scared my wife more than rage would have. Calm people don't yell. Calm people build cases. I didn't confront Deborah. I didn't post about it online. I went straight to Priya, who by then had 11 months of flow data showing the reservoir had dropped 42 feet, an amount that qualified under state code as a Class 2 environmental violation. The same category applied to industrial runoff spills. Then I went to the county water board with the forged permit application, the falsified certified mail record, and a signature analysis matching the forgery to the same source that had framed me for fraud. The pieces that had once looked like two unrelated disasters in my life turned out to be one single plan, executed by one desperate woman trying to steal water rights worth more than her own home. Here's the part nobody expected, including me. Because the reservoir fed water to 6 downstream households, and because the drop in the water table had caused 2 of those homes' wells to run dry during my imprisonment, the state didn't just charge Deborah with unauthorized water diversion. They opened a case for endangering a protected water supply, a charge that in this state carries potential restitution calculated on replacement infrastructure, costs, environmental remediation, and damages to every affected household. When the numbers came back, they didn't total in the thousands. They totaled just above $11 million. And because her son's forgery had been used to fabricate evidence in a criminal fraud case against me, the district attorney added an obstruction of justice charge that turned Deborah's civil nightmare into a felony one. The HOA board tried to distance itself immediately, releasing a statement claiming Deborah had acted alone, but the financial records told a different story. The board had voted, on record, to approve the pipeline installation, which meant every board member who signed off shared personal liability for the restitution. Brook Hollow Estates, the gated community with the ornamental clubhouse lake, was forced into a court-ordered asset assessment, and the reservoir pipeline had to be ripped out at their expense, replaced with municipal water lines the development had refused to install 2 years earlier because it was too costly. Deborah Voss didn't lose a title or a parking spot. She lost her house, sold in a court-mandated liquidation to cover partial restitution, and she's currently serving a sentence that will keep her out of any HOA leadership role for the rest of her adult life, because felony convictions disqualify board membership under state HOA statutes. As for the reservoir, it refilled slower than any of us expected, nature taking its own quiet revenge on everyone's timeline. But 18 months after I came home, I stood at the edge of that water with my daughter, the same one who watched me get arrested, and we watched a heron land on the surface like nothing had ever happened. She asked me if I was still angry. I told her the truth. I wasn't angry anymore. I'd spent that anger wisely, and it built something that outlasted every apology Deborah Voss never gave. If there's one thing prison teaches you that no courtroom ever could, it's that the people who think silence means surrender are always, always wrong.